The art of being an NFL draft bust.
Anything and everything can be an art form, even failure. I mean, when you get down to it, there's no doubt that even though all of us fail in life at some point, some just do it more impressively than others. But in an environment like the NFL, where the standards players are measured to are more or less the same, the players who fall short of the hype around them have a variety of ways to maximize that plunge. And after 85 drafts...
There is a lot of quarterbacks, or just players, that I would have whiffed on big time as an NFL draft bust. Jamarcus Russel would have been one of them. I thought he was incredible. Fun fact, I also played blackjack recently next to Jamarcus Russell. Sadly, it was a $10 table. Not sad for me, but sad for a guy who signed a $60 million deal.
In league history and countless roller coaster careers, calling it an art form is really just giving it its due respect. For the purposes of this video in refining that art, a draft bust is considered to be any player drafted with a significant amount of first-round capital that managed to perform below even modest expectations. So, as a trusted expert in falling short of expectations, seeing as how I do it all the time without an NFL salary,
ditto.
Today I'd like to review some of the most surefire techniques to having a pro football career immortalized on yearly lists of the greatest busts of all time. Because at the end of the day, it's better to go out in a flaming ball of self-destruction than to just disappear silently into the night.
Very
but
true.
Before we discuss the art of going from hero to zero, let me take a quick second to talk about this video's sponsor over at TE80 at Hello. A huge draft, in summary, is essentially overanalyzed gambling. As an NFL front office,
I think the problem with bust, or I think what makes bust happen, is just the idea of how different like life can be from college to the NFL. As far as, you know, can a player adapt? Can a player play through adversity? Can a player not have the best resources? Can a player have different coaching, a different system? Some players will go from playing in California to playing in snowy Buffalo. You know, that's a big deal.
Decipher the best fit for your squad from a range of physical traits, indications of character that you've either seen in interviews or heard about from different sources, and plays that you've seen on film that either excite or concern you, maybe even both. But even in cases where all the pieces seem to fall into place and the match is just made in heaven, football players are still humans like the rest of us. Things go wrong all the time, whether or not it's their fault. But if we're going to determine the ultimate NFL bust, the chosen bust, if you will, then you can't just have one bad trait that led to their career's demise. You're going to need a lot of them.
I was born with glass bones and paper skin.
Yeah, injuries are a big one. I mean, injuries, you know, like a player like Robert Griffin, who relied so heavily on his ability to run and all that stuff, when you start taking away his legs and you start taking away years of his career for rehab and therapy and stuff like that, I mean, injuries are... It's almost impossible to say you're a bust when injuries are a part of it, in my opinion.
Every morning I break my legs, and every afternoon I break my arms.
Among the ways that a highly talented player
first one, baby, the first one,
can become an NFL bust, this one is definitely the saddest and furthest from their control. Because while some players are naturally prone to a higher number of injuries, some also just have freak accidents that can derail a bright future. That was the case with Kajana Carter, the very last running back in NFL history to be selected with the first overall pick back in 1995. Coming out of Penn State, Carter was considered to be as sure of a tailback as sure could be, blazing past seemingly every defender as part.
Like a running back's a good example. You know, like a running back gets hurt. I mean, it's much easier for a quarterback to come back from an ACL if they're not a running quarterback than like a running back. Because, I mean, you're talking about, it's such a physically demanding position anyways, to have any kind of mishap or anything like that holding you back or stunting your development, on top of just being young, on top of, you know, finding a new system, finding a new playbook, finding new teammates, like that's just brutal.
Part of a 12-0 Nittany Lions team. But his run in the NFL, on the other hand, would be cut down almost immediately, as Carter tore his ACL on the third carry of his very first preseason game with the Bengals.
On turf, like that's something else I'm telling you, like I don't know Kajana Carter's career, but he may have never played on turf before in his life. And this stuff happens where all of a sudden now it's like, all right, go play a faster version of the game you played against tougher competition on a surface you've never played on. Like, this is exactly how injuries happen. Like, I've never played, like I played baseball in high school. I've never played baseball on artificial turf. So if I'm a shortstop and I'm fielding ground balls my entire career through college, through high school, whatever, and I'm really good, and all of a sudden I go and play in like a dome where all of a sudden I'm fielding every single ground ball or most of the ground balls I see off a turf. Like, that's a completely different game.
He'd only played 8 snaps as a pro, but his rookie season was already over at that point. Considering that an ACL tear in 1995 was also a much more brutal injury than medical advancement has made it today, Carter was never going to regain that burst he lost. And to add insult to injury, or I guess to add injury to injury, he'd also sustained a broken wrist, a torn rotator cuff, and a dislocated knee within the next 4 seasons, effectively ending his career having never eclipsed 500 yards in a single year. But, enough about these freak accidents changing careers. I mean, they're a critical part of why so many hyped players end up underachieving in the NFL, but there's no fun in seeing someone get their career kneecapped by the football reaper. Now, if we're going to talk about what it means to truly be a flameout in pro football, we're going to need to discuss...
This is something else too, man. Like, this is something that, you forget that they're human, but if my work said, hey, we're going to give you $18 million guaranteed, I'm probably not going to care too much about my work. You know what I mean? Like, some people, sure. But when you're 22, 21, it's like some of these draft picks are, and it's like, hey, here's $20 million. Okay. I played my football at Kansas State. Oh, well, now you're in Miami with $20 million, and you're an NFL superstar. You're playing on Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football. Yeah, there are issues. Like, absolutely. And that's just partying, and that's fun, all that stuff. And then you have the people who play through injuries and get addicted to pain pills. So it certainly plays a part. And this is something that people do not get a lot is there are some kids who grow up in Podunk, Mississippi, and go play college in Mississippi, and it's like, they go home every other weekend, and they're eating lunch in the cafeteria, and they've never been to a fancy restaurant, and they have literally no money. And within the course of 2 weeks, they go from their family living in a single bedroom house, making ends meet, living paycheck to paycheck, to getting handed $20-30 million, and all of a sudden their entire universe changes. So that's like one of those things where you expect every draft pick or every player to just have that mindset of being able to play through it. But I know for me, I don't think I'd be able to. So I get this one too.
Football is an insanely popular sport in the United States, so it only figures that those at the very top of the game receive rock star levels of fame and attention all throughout their life. While this pushes some to place pressure on themselves to outwork their competition in the public eye, for others it provides a window to become complacent, especially after reaching that lifelong dream of being drafted by an NFL franchise. Probably the most high-profile case of this in recent years was Johnny Manziel, a player who fell from his position as football's golden boy almost immediately after realizing success in the NFL.
Johnny had a lot of other problems. I mean, Johnny was a superstar before. He kind of had the Bosworth thing, which he was a superstar in college, So he was hanging out with Drake and all that stuff in college. The problem is when you're not that good anymore, people just don't care about you that much anymore. Johnny had more issues about like his physical abilities on the field, and then anytime you're not performing, that obviously casts a bigger spotlight on what you're doing off the field to hurt whatever you're doing on the field.
NFL wouldn't be as easy as it had.
I mean, for example, if Brett Favre would have been a partier and all that stuff that Johnny Manziel was doing, people would have forgiven Brett Favre because he's Brett Favre.
Been at lower levels.
Yeah, you're cool. You're drunk. Yeah, okay. I didn't say you're drunk.
No one challenges the idea that Manziel was one of the most electrifying players in college football, with his run at Texas A&M netting him the first Heisman Trophy to ever be won by a freshman. But where he excelled in college didn't stem from constant improvement or outsmarting the looks the defenses served up to him. More often than not, Johnny Football built his name on an ability to improvise and capitalize on a lack of athleticism from the defenders he was facing. And of course, that was only the on-field concern, with a reputation for partying hard and finding his way into controversy that was just as infamous as his on-field prowess. So naturally, a player with that many red flags could only be overdrafted in the first round by the Cleveland Browns. And without hesitation...
I mean, honestly, I don't even think this is that bad of a... Like, whenever they made this pick, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I mean, look, they need a quarterback. They need excitement. They need relevance. It's a 22nd pick. You got a Heisman winner with whatever, the flair for being really good. take a chance. You know, if this guy is good, if he does figure it out, you never know what you got. If he can give you 70% of what he gave Texas A&M, this pick could work out. So this is something where, yeah, he's a bust, but it's not like he's a top 5 pick. A quarterback at 22, you know, it happens.
The media sent the hype train off the rails and into the stratosphere.
One day, I am predicting, Johnny Manziel will become even bigger in the city of Cleveland than his buddy and business partner LeBron James ever was in the city of Cleveland.
So for a guy that already lacked commitment to improve as a quarterback talent, that validation so early into his pro career would already put the first of many nails in the coffin.
Manziel's going to keep. Back to throw. Looking, and it's going to be intercepted.
This was his problem. His problem was in college, he could make every throw, he could run. In the NFL, he couldn't do any of it. He couldn't run. He wasn't faster than anybody. His arm was relatively weak compared to other NFL standards, and that's what happened to him.
11, Manziel to throw, knocked down. Stepping up, in trouble, gets away, slings it end zone in traffic, intercepted by Joe.
So many ads. The joys of being monetized.
Doubt that even though all of us face a window to letting that fuel a desire to prove himself at the next level, he struggled to depart from the lifestyle of partying and riding his name recognition that continued to cost his performance, even going as far as to making an appearance in Vegas during his team's bye week and wearing a disguise to go out partying after being ruled out of the regular season finale. Overall, the Browns organization did very little to provide Manziel with a stable environment as a young quarterback, but in the same breath, you'd have to be insane to not place the majority of the blame on him given just how many chances he would squander before eventually finding himself out of the league. But while Johnny Football can be looked back on as a cautionary tale of buying into what was always a mirage, the story of another SEC quarterback drafted a few years prior represents a true nightmare scenario for any NFL front office.
Jamarcus Russel changed the NFL. This changed how guaranteed contracts happened, where there was so much at stake for these teams that they cut back on the guaranteed money and the contracts that could be offered to these draft picks. So he was such a bust and such a dramatic bust that he changed the NFL forever.
Russell was
also, to this day, they say that the highest graded pro day in the history of college draft prospects was Jamarcus Russell. They say his pro day was the greatest pro day by a college quarterback in the history of the NFL draft.
Ridiculous athletic talent, and at 6'6", 260, he dominated at the college level, boasting an arm that was seen as one of the best of all time by countless draft analysts. So, of course, for Al Davis of the Raiders,
yeah, I mean, like there's another thing where you've got a 6'6", 260-pound athletic quarterback who can throw the ball further than anybody in the world. Like, he's the opposite of Johnny Manziel, where he could do physically, he was way ahead of everybody else. You know, so yeah, if you're the Raiders, you're the first overall pick, how are you not drafting him? He had the incredible career at LSU, the best pro day in history. Yeah, take him. You know, but this is one of those deals where, again, he's from Mobile, Alabama, and you give him $60 million, and he just didn't have the work ethic.
Physical specimen like Russell was quickly cemented as their number one choice in the 2007 NFL Draft. But as quickly as the projections for historic greatness were drawn up, Jamarcus would break out his eraser. He immediately held out of his first training camp to leverage a 6-year contract that made him the highest paid rookie in NFL history, but his rookie season would fall far short of anything close to that, eventually only playing in 4 games and finishing with 373 yards, 2
I don't know if they're going to talk about this, but there was a story that when he was in Oakland, the coaches gave him a blank tape, like a blank gameplay tape or whatever, and they told him to study it. And Jamarcus came back and was like, yeah, man, I saw the defensive coverages. I'm really ready. I'm feeling good. And the coaches had given him a blank tape, and the coaches knew then that he wasn't watching, he wasn't studying, he wasn't doing anything. So that was Jamarcus's issue.
Touchdowns and 4 interceptions on 54% passing. After a mediocre second season, he'd show up to training camp at 305 pounds, a concrete measurement of how little football meant to him just 2 seasons into his contract, and the season that followed that would put the dagger in his career after 9 games where he completed 48% of his passes for 3 touchdowns and 11 picks. In the end, Russell's lack of passion or motivation for football showed in every aspect of his career, whether it was taking care of his health, falling asleep in team meetings, taking trips to Las Vegas like our previously mentioned friend, or even a hilarious story that involved the team giving him an empty DVD case and telling him to study the material in it over the weekend. Upon returning, he informed his coaches that he now understood the opponent's blitz concepts better than before, confirming to everyone that he had in fact lacked the motivation to even open up the case. In a league that punishes any insufficiency, whether that be physical or mental, being completely unwilling to strengthen either aspect of your game when you're being given tens of millions.
I mean, that's one of those things where, again, like, it's impossible to judge that. This is a guy who did what he had to do to get to the highest level of college. You know, played at LSU, did really well, and then the second he reaches the precipice, the second he reaches the height of the NFL, he just throws it all away. How the hell is Oakland supposed to know that's going to happen? That's just a coin flip you take. That you never know the makeup of these guys as far as what's inside of them. You know, you don't know what's going to break a player, what's going to break a mindset, what's going to do all that stuff, or what's going to make a player make a mindset.
Of dollars to do so is insanely pathetic, and Jamarcus Russel is rightfully remembered as one of the biggest frauds in league history. But while allowing your off-field life to control your on-field life is among the most compelling archetypes for an NFL bust, there's still one more that really only becomes with the power of hindsight.
So many ads. Duke's mayonnaise? We're in a Duke's mayonnaise ads? That's where we're at? That's our world? We got the full ad? Not like this. Oh my God, that was a lot of bread. Bust by comparison. This is okay. We'll see where this goes. This is going to be, I guess, like the Ryan Leaf, Peyton Manning team. But Ryan Leaf was more of a Jamarcus Russell, Johnny Manziel style.
Having your team's golden goose underperform relative to
Trubisky just sucks. I mean, this isn't even by comparison. Trubisky is bad compared to a majority of the league. Trubisky is bad compared to Nick Foles. You know, like, he's not bad just because they passed on Patrick Mahomes. He's just a bust. He's a bust.
To their draft capital is a frustrating thing for NFL fans to experience. But you know what's a lot worse? Having players drafted after your team's mistake go on to take their franchise to new heights and leave you wondering with each waking moment what could have been. But despite the fact that I've enjoyed placing clips of a specific recent situation that applies here, there's no greater example of a bust whose legacy was exacerbated by their competition than Tony Mandarich, an offensive tackle drafted back in 1989 by the Green Bay Packers. In the moment, the pick
people thought this dude was the Hulk. I mean, he was on a Sports Illustrated cover. I'm sure they'll show it. Yeah, there it is. The incredible bulk. I mean, this guy was one of those guys where it's just so big.
Really seemed like a no-brainer, as Mandarich was hyped up as not just one of, but the best offensive tackle prospect of all time, blowing the combine out of the water and being crowned the incredible bulk by the media for his superhuman build. But the moment that Mandarich became part of the NFL, the entire persona he constructed for himself deflated completely. As you can probably tell from these pics of a 6'6", 330-pound man with 11% body fat, Mandarich was juicing, and had managed to take advantage of lax NCAA drug testing rules to exploit loopholes and supercharge his draft stock. But in the NFL, those drug testing policies weren't so kind, so to avoid ruining the facade, he decided to stop entirely. By then, though, it was too late. The steroids he'd been on had consumed his entire game to that point, and within 2 seasons of stopping, Mandarich would lose 40 pounds of muscle.
See, I think that's more on the Packers. You know, it's like, how did the Packers not do their due diligence to realize this dude was juicing? Like, how do you go through all the combine? How do you go through all the medical tests, all the interviews, see him, and not be like, hey, man, I think this guy might be juiced out of his mind?
Muscle and a significant amount of the aggression and physicality he'd been afforded artificially. Within 3 seasons, he would be out of football and would go on to struggle with further substance abuse before fortunately coming out clean on the other side and even making an NFL comeback. But while Mandarich's legacy as a bust would be severe enough on its own, it really can only be put into perspective when you realize the group of peers that were drafted around him. The 1989 draft was one of the best in NFL history, featuring 4 Hall of Famers in the top 5, the only time that has ever happened, and very likely the only time it ever will. Sandwiching any player between Troy Aikman, Barry Sanders.
Yeah, this is rough right here. I mean, this is real rough. Like, I mean, it's hard to look at this kind of stuff because you never know a team's needs. But, man, yeah, I mean, And this is like the Darko Milicic thing, where Darko was taken ahead of like Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, you know, like players like that, Chris Bosh, I think. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what their needs were, but Dion was one of those guys where it's kind of crazy Dion fell this far, because Dion was like, okay, well, if nothing else, he's the best athlete in the world, you know?
Derek Thomas, and Deion Sanders is a great way to make them look like a bust, even if they weren't a bust to begin with, and Mandarich most definitely was. So, with all things considered, there's no direct path to success in the National Football League, but as we've learned, there are many paths to failure. But being able to harness every single path simultaneously allows you to not only be remembered as an NFL bust, but as the NFL bust. And after studying the art of flunking out of football for years now, I'm more than comfortable awarding that crown to Ryan Leaf of the San Diego Chargers. He's one of the most famous bust stories in football history, and while
Ryan Leaf was another guy who just couldn't miss. You know, it's another guy who's like, okay, this guy can't miss prospect, perfect quarterback build, compared to Peyton Manning, and he was taken after Peyton Manning, the famous, 1-2, like, do you take Leaf, do you take Manning? But he also had all-field issues, so he had a little bit of everything involved with the bust.
I may not have executed each of the pathways taken in this video to a T. I have a hard time finding another case that so compellingly blends bad luck, arrogance, poor work ethic, and to top it all off, the shadow of an NFL great to compare against. The 1998 NFL Draft featured a quarterback debate that rivals any in draft history, with the comparison of Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf taking center stage, two young quarterbacks poised to lead whoever drafted them to future success. On one end, there was Manning, a poised pocket passer who was thought to be the safe pick.
Imagine messing this up. Like, imagine if they would have took Leaf first and Manning second.
But on the other, there was Leaf, who presented a more raw skill set but higher overall ceiling. As history tells it, Peyton Manning would go first overall to the Indianapolis Colts, and the San Diego Chargers would surrender a king's ransom to move up and draft Ryan Leaf, each effectively securing their franchise quarterback. Now, Leaf's name is synonymous with the term bust nowadays, but what's important to remember is that at that time, he was seen as a player with limitless potential and athletic gifts at 6'5", 235 pounds, and innate playmaking ability. The only questions in the deck were really minor gripes about how driven Leaf would be to refine his skill set to the next level. But to the shock of everyone who scouted him, the house of cards his stellar draft profile was built on would not take very long to fall. Leaf won his first 2 games as a starter, but he hit a brick wall in the following weeks, completing 1 of 15 passing with 4 turnovers in a loss to the Chiefs, which was followed by a
1 of 15. Oh, yikes.
Now infamous explosion at a reporter in the locker room.
Don't talk to me, all right? Knock it off!
And then, in the following week, Leaf would find himself benched after throwing 4 first-half interceptions against the Giants. In a rookie season...
Well, that's something else, too. Like, this is a guy, Ryan Leaf, who probably has never had adversity in his playing career. He was always probably the best. He always probably won. He was never questioned. All of a sudden now, the pressure is at the absolute highest. He feels that pressure. Oh, and now he's no longer performing at a high level. He's now being questioned every step of the way. He now is not winning. Those are things that these people, just as humans, have never dealt with, and now they're having to deal with them on the highest level. Peyton Manning was similar. Peyton Manning was terrible his rookie year. He threw like 40 interceptions. But the fact was, Peyton Manning could deal with that on a personal level and come out ahead. But, so him and Leaf had pretty similar starts to where they both had to play through being really bad. Obviously, Manning did much better at that. Leaf didn't have that personal capability.
That would be filled with angry tirades and alienating his teammates by attempting to shift blame onto them, Leaf would start 10 games but complete only 45% of his passes for 2 touchdowns.
2 touchdowns and 15 interceptions? Oh my God.
And 15 interceptions, in arguably the worst season for a rookie quarterback in the modern era. To make matters worse, in attempting to reverse that the following season, he would be placed on injured reserve before the year even began due to an injury in his throwing shoulder, but upon returning to the field, he only made headlines for getting into a shouting match with his team's GM and coaches, later resulting in a suspension from the Chargers. The following season in 2000 wouldn't see much better results, with a concoction of further injuries, even poorer play, and terrible locker room antics punching Leafs ticket out of San Diego long before
he just got obliterated. This hit would have got this guy kicked out of the league. This hit nowadays would have been absolutely targeting get your ass in the locker room.
Poor play and terrible locker room antics,
I mean, this is a solid like second after the ball is released.
punching Leafs ticket out of San Diego long before the season was over, completing a trifecta on how to not carry yourself as an NFL quarterback. When all was said and done, and after bouncing around a few more teams, Leaf won just 4 total games in his career, and walked away from football abruptly shutting the door on any possibility of redemption, just accepting his fate as the premier bust in NFL history. Of course, his counterpart Peyton Manning would go on to establish one of the most impressive resumes in league history, with 2 Super Bowls, 5 NFL MVPs, 3 passing leader awards, along with a flood of other accolades with the Colts and Broncos. So, now looking back at that critical 1998 decision, if anything, it really demonstrates how fragile the NFL draft as a concept can be. You take 2 prospects that scouts have to split hairs to differentiate between, and one ends up as one of the greatest passers of all time, and the other as
There's so many variables, like, look, all of these prospects have the physical capabilities. They can all do that. They can all be the best. It's just, you have the variables of the organization, the coaches, the playbook, the system, injuries, their own mental capabilities, their abilities to deal with adversity, the abilities to change of a geographical location, money, wealth, fame. Like, every single one of those variables has to fall in the perfect balance to even allow the player to rely on their physical gifts. Very rarely do they check all the boxes and then the physical gifts fail. It's usually a combination of all of it.
as one of the most incredible self-implosions ever seen in pro sports, throwing for nearly 3 times as many interceptions as he did touchdowns in his whole career. To do that takes talent, because not everyone can get up that high in order to fall that far from the path to greatness. Establishing that harsh of a dichotomy with someone who was once thought of as your exact equal takes skill. So, if we constantly praise the Peyton Mannings for doing their part in creating that rift, then we should also be able to do the same for the Ryan Leafs of the world. Because ultimately, what is success without failure? That's right, nothing. And that is what makes being an NFL draft bust so special.
Good video. Solid video right there. Really solid stuff.